We return with TYT's The Conversation, and now joins us Assistant Professor of Sociology at McGill University, Barry Eidlin. Barry is a comparative historical sociologist, and he's interested in studying class, politics, inequality. Welcome in, Barry.
Glad to be here, Adrienne. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, especially during this time, which is so interesting, especially given that Trump has lost the election, whether he admits it or not. But I know you realize that even with the election loss for him, it doesn't mean the end of Trumpism. So what do you mean by that?
Well, so Trump represents many different things. He has his personal peccadillos of his bombastic and cluelessness and that kind of, and this sort of bumbling style of leadership, but he also represents a type of politics. And that is something that, that sort of more authoritarian brand, that nationalism, that appeal to racism, to that America Firstism, that has a long tradition in American politics, that he sort of distilled into this new form and clearly has an audience in the American electorate, particularly in the absence of compelling alternate visions.
Very interesting that you say that it is a brand of politics as well. At least I'd like to think that we had evolved past it. But the reality is that no, it's very much here alive and well. And so who do you think is the last politician that really reflected these qualities of Trumpism?
Well, I mean, an obvious one would be someone like Joe McCarthy. That would be obvious. But there's a whole. I mean, that you can think back to the days of like the America First League. This is something that really is a throwback to really the early 20th century in a lot of ways. If I'm putting my sort of comparative historical sociologist hat on, and obviously updated for today. So where you have where the other is something different today. It's Muslims and immigrants and particularly brown immigrants. And but that's where that tradition comes from. That sort of nativism that goes back to the early days of the Republic.
And we had that in the early days, and then it really seemed to evolve and we moved past it. So what happened there in terms of why we said, hey, this is no longer gonna work for us?
So I think that there we need to really think about America's position of global leadership that it asserted, particularly after World War II, where it became the dominant, to use a big sociology word, hegemonic power in the world, and that kind of America Firstism became more of an idea of sort of positioning America for global leadership. So I think the flip side of that is that the return of that type of ideology could be viewed as a symptom of an America that's losing its grip on that position of leadership, and that sort of turn inward then is a sort of grasping at straws in a context where America is actually losing its global position in some ways with the rise of these competitors, particularly China, which obviously occupies a lot of Donald Trump's minimal brain space.
So if I can kind of, I guess, translate your university speak, I'm kind of getting the thought that you're saying that we were like really a big deal back in the day. We're not so much anymore. So we got super insecure and we brought Trump in because we wanted to feel like we could flex. Would that be accurate?
That's not a bad translation, I would say. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's kind of what I do. I translate good things. But Trump is not necessarily a good thing. So how do you think Trumpism will play out when it concerns the future? As we know that there are hints out there, and that hint kind of coming from Trump and his crew, that he is going to run again in 2024, as there definitely seems to be a platform for this caliber of nonsense.
Yeah, so he's definitely asserted his control over the Republican Party, and so it's going to be very hard for competitors to make a move. I'm actually less worried about Trump, the individual, and more about the ideas. And my bigger worry is actually something that you were going to have a politician who has similar politics without the personal ineptitude and bombasticness, who's a much more competent politician. Because that's really, I mean, why Trump what lost in the end was really just his inability to, to govern really, and his willingness to basically just insult his electorate and just these personal qualities. But those politics in the hands of a much more capable politician are actually something that's much more worrisome.
Absolutely. This thought that you could have someone who has a little bit more tact and knows how to adhere to decorum, yet still has these baseless and disgusting and revolting kind of ideologies, but maybe also brings charisma to the table, could be very, very threatening considering the constituent base out there who really seem to like this thing. So I guess, where do you see America moving in the future in terms of maybe how we can stop this from happening?
Yeah, so I think the big thing to understand here is that we're in a crisis of political representation on both the right and the left. So the Republican Party, obviously, we've been talking about that. Trump's taken it over, and there are a lot of people on the Republican side who feel left out of that. But over on the Democratic Party side as well, there's a huge crisis of political representation there, in that the huge numbers of Americans who really want these broader political visions, are not seeing themselves represented in the Democratic Party. So you look at the data and we see huge support for things like Medicare for all, doing something for climate change, whether we call it the Green New Deal or something else, criminal justice reform, racial justice. There's broad support for these things. And yet within the party, there's huge contradictions and people saying that we can't touch listening to the 10-foot pole and so on and so forth. So I think that what we need to see going forward is if there's going to be a constituency within the party that can actually articulate that broader vision. We saw that somewhat with Bernie Sanders, who obviously fell short. But to the extent that we can see a broader political vision that actually speaks to the sort of fundamental needs of everyday Americans, that's going to be a ticket forward, I would say.
Yeah, and that would be a very powerful one. And so I guess when it comes to who can make that happen, I know you kind of mentioned Barry Sanders, but kind of falling short. Is there
not
someone
the running back, Bernie Sanders, the politician?
Yeah. And so when you talk about, who may be out there that has this full package that could really change it all, who are you thinking?
I mean, people obviously talk about AOC, who's not of age yet. But I mean, I think that where I'm seeing hope in the current political landscape is in that new layer of left political leadership. The squad has expanded its ranks in the most recent round with Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman. The Democratic Socialists of America endorsed candidates. I think they win 20 of 27 of their endorsed races. And there's basically what I'm seeing, is a new layer of political leadership that is emerging amongst today's young people that is really inspiring, as someone who's really came of political age in a period of decline and really a wilderness for the left. So I don't want to necessarily name check any individuals, but I think that there's what's more important is this broad layer of political leadership that we see emerging amongst today's young people.
Yes, and hopefully there will be a lot of inspiration there, because we do need those new voices and that change. It's just, when we unfortunately look at our leadership, they tend to all gravitate toward one direction, and we need, fresh blood, new ideas. And so in terms of the work that you do, is there anything that you see on the forefront other than this Trumpism that you think people need to be paying attention to?
Well, obviously my focus is on worker organization. And I think that people have been fretting about the amount of union support that went for Trump. There's always a good chunk of the union vote that goes for Republicans. So I'm less concerned about that. But what I do see that's quite interesting, one of the other upsides I see coming out of this election is the clear role that labor played really in tipping the balance in Biden's favor, as imperfect a candidate as Biden was, right? I think, particularly we have to acknowledge the work of Unite Here in door knocking in Arizona, in Nevada, and Pennsylvania. I think it's clear to say that if you didn't have those laid off hotel workers and restaurant workers knocking on doors in those 3 states, they would not have gone for Biden. So I think that the degree to which labor can reassert a position of political leadership in this society, we're going to see a better way forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Barry, for joining us. And can you please tell our viewers where they can find you?
Yes, I'm on Twitter at Eidlin, EIDLIN.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Like what you see? Click the subscribe button below and don't forget to ring the bell to never miss another video from the Young Turks.